Welcome back to another episode of Free Mind Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Hurt. Before we jump into this thing, guys, I just want to thank our sponsors really quick. First off, Bioprotein Tech, the makers of BioPro Plus. This is an amazing product. I used it for a month after my leg surgery, my knee surgery, and it helped me bounce back super fast. It's a non-synthetic growth hormone alternative. You just take it under your tongue sublingually for 90 seconds. You let it sit there in the morning. Super easy. And then you go about your day, and it helps with your libido, your metabolism, your skin health, your immune system, anti-aging effects, cognition. Keeps me super sharp. My energy levels have been fantastic. I love it. I've actually used real growth hormone, testosterone, all kinds of things. And so I was naturally very skeptical about this product. But guys, I'm telling you, it's phenomenal. So you can use my code FREEMIND, FREEMIND, at bioproteintech.com to save $30 off of a month's supply. So go hit that up. And thank you to Bioprotein Technology for sponsoring the show. Next, justworkco.com to pick up any of the t-shirts that you see me wear on the show and my social media. And if you want to support the show, go there, pick up a shirt. And lastly, as always, the only nutritional supplements that I use, First Phorm supplements, firstphorm.com/hurt, H-U-R-T. And that'll save you on your shipping costs. So go there, firstphorm.com/hurt, H-U-R-T. Okay. My guest today is a patriot, a veteran, thoughtful guy, someone I really enjoyed talking to. He is the host of the Citizen podcast and the Drinkin Bros podcast, the various podcasts that they do. It was an awesome conversation. I hope that it didn't get too deep, and I hope you get some value out of it. I certainly did, and I hope you do too. Anyway, guys, Dan Hollaway. When I was kind of thrust into unwillingly the political discourse a couple years ago, I started to look for people who were opposed to the Republican Democrat BS and were just like, why don't we assess people as people and just try to be good humans? And that was when I really started to get into what you talk about and especially what you're doing at Citizen. So, man, it's an honor to have you on the show. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Yeah, First Phorm, Andy is a crazy person, but in the best kind of way.
In the best way.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome, man. He's I have a lot of admiration for him for a lot of reasons, but recently because of essentially the fact that he's got so much to lose and he doesn't care. He doesn't mind speaking up. And for me, as somebody who kind of dealt with on a smaller scale, speaking out and, losing a job and all that kind of shit, it's cool to see because I think one of the big issues is that people are terrified to voice their opinions. And again, that's one of the reasons why I like what you do. So to start off, I guess, can you just describe what the purpose of Citizen is and what you're trying to achieve? Because you transitioned from the American Party podcast, right, to Citizen.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's exactly the target there?
Well, so first let me, I don't think it's that Andy doesn't care about the consequences. I think it's that he realizes that none of this shit we have matters unless we also have liberty. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's how do you spend money or enjoy the resources you've collected or whatever without the liberty to do so? It doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah.
As far as Citizen goes, I was doing American Party. Myself and Dakota Meyer were doing American Party, and the idea of American Party was just that, you can't trust any of these political parties. They're institutions that are corrupted just like anybody else. Um, but what I felt was there was a big politically homeless population that didn't really have anywhere to go to communicate with one another and share ideas and all of that. But the show continued, I found myself slipping more and more into just being a commentator on how fucked up everything is, which is, I suppose, in a way useful to some degree, but there's plenty of people doing that already.
Right. Most people are doing that.
Yeah. And I think frankly, I think it's a bit of a grift. There's a lot of social media accounts, especially out there, that operate under this premise that the left is evil and conservatives are good, and it's a fight of good versus evil. And that's not only reductive, it's wrong as well. And it's also pretty stupid.
Yeah.
And the only reason they do it is because it garners clicks, which gets them ad revenue. But, excuse me, I own other businesses, so I don't give a shit about that. Although, I would like to think in a perfect world, because it wasn't always like this. We've made quite a few sacrifices when it did cost us money. But the purpose of Citizen is that it's my premise that you can either bitch and moan about your rights and do nothing to secure them, and you will be a subject of people who have the ambition and lack of moral character to rise to power, or you can be a citizen and accept the rights, secure the rights by exercising the responsibilities you have. You know what I mean? As an adult human being. Yeah. And I think there's it might sound like a banal distinction, but it's not. That's the whole purpose. If you look at any definition of the word citizen, it's going to include the phrase rights and responsibilities. And we're in that age now where everybody wants stuff and doesn't want to do shit for it, Yeah,
absolutely. And it's something that I talk about a lot too, that just, it struck me as odd the more I started to talk to people that are younger. I'm in my mid-30s, so I guess I'm the older millennial generation or whatever the fuck. But young people today, and I hate even saying it that way because I sound like some old dude complaining, but they lack that just overall paradigm that includes, I must do that which is beneficial to the rest of my community, my fellow man, etc. And I'm talking like, I used to own a company where I employed almost 100 people, most of whom were in their early 20s, mid 20s. And it's missing. It's like this feeling of responsibility for everything we have that we got just by consequence of the fact that we were born into a great circumstance. And we feel no need to actually continue to make it better and to do our part, which is, again, why I'm kind of attracted to your message, because I found myself falling into that. And I think it's easy to do, man, to just complain about Gavin Newsom or complain about Maxine Waters or complain about Justin Trudeau or complain about, you name it. You can, and on the other side too, Mitch McConnell. And, this is part of the reason I catch so much shit from both sides is I'll call them both out because it's just, to me, it's a human issue most of the time. But it's one thing to do that, and I think necessary to bring awareness, but it's another thing to say, okay, here's how you can actually make a difference. Here's how you can be a better human and contribute. And that's why I've kind of transitioned my messaging too. And in no small part, it's been inspiring to see guys like you do that and guys like Andy do that, because it's easy to just talk about how fucked up it is, but it's another thing to say, okay, here's what we can do and here's what we should be doing to fix the problem.
Even I think people usually stay on the periphery of issues. They stay downstream because, I guess, to be fair, it's easier to identify problems downstream. They're more obvious there, but I think there's a part of it that is a confluence between laziness and a lack of responsibility. You know, once you actually point out what's really going on, what the real problem is, now you bear some responsibility for taking part in solving that problem, right?
Absolutely.
And it's the reason that people will. It's the reason people will avert their eyes when somebody falls or slips or something instead of going to help them, because their compulsion to resist awkwardness or you know, whatever, any kind of pain, whether it's social or physical, is stronger than their compulsion to help other people. And I think it's because there's a general misunderstanding of what it means to be a human being. For the last couple of decades, we've kind of persisted in this delusion that self-care is the most important thing that happens to you. And you can see it applied in the coddling of the American veteran, especially. You know, if you read some of the publications, you would think that the problem has been largely ignored. And I guess to some degree that's true. But the the real problem is that we have a misunderstanding of what motivates people, because society has lost the core motivation of a typical human being. The core motivation of a typical human being is to create and protect your family, right? It's called kin selection, K-I-N selection, like how a hillbilly would say related to you.
Yeah.
Kin selection. So we go through these processes. There are genetic parts of it where, you know, you have your own child or it's a member of your family, and through proximity and DNA, you feel close to them. That's one part of it. Another part of it is who we decide to become family with as adults. Now, one of the biggest, I guess, not biggest, one of the most obvious examples of this is the military, because you are forced to kin select in a way that you've never had before in your life, and your life literally depends on it. It's not just a matter of convenience or desire or whatever. And I think a lot of people, first responders and military veterans, came to that conclusion, like, oh, my family is whoever the fuck I say it is, you know. And it's a very eye-opening realization that at the root of all of the motivation we have as human beings is to create community, because that's what it takes for us to survive. In the same way that a fluke will burrow its way inside the head of an ant and make it go crazy and climb to the top of a blade of grass so it'll get eaten by a cow so the fluke can have its babies inside of the cow's stomach. You know, if you want to be reductive about it, we're all just going through this mechanical life, making decisions about how we're going to build the best family and the best community, and then secure that family into the future in the second, third, fourth generations. Now, as human beings are wont to do, we've come to this idea that we're smarter than nature is.
Yeah.
Right. That we don't have to do those things anymore. Beyond this, we keep unsolving problems that thousands and thousands, millions in some cases of years of, you know, I guess what you would call multivariate testing, right? Because that's what evolution is.
Natural selection. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, God, trillions of gigabytes worth of data of testing has happened. And we think we're smarter than that because some asshole wrote it in a book. Like, come on, man. No, all of this is about building community, building our family first. The family is the smallest form of government, the smallest form of community, and then building communities larger and larger, and then safer and safer, and then more productive and so on. And it's no surprise, it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, that since we've started looking inward towards ourselves and prioritizing our own feelings over the work that we do towards the goal that should be everyone's goal in humanity, we've become more depressed. We've lost testosterone. We've lost our ability to reason. You know what I mean? And everybody's shot. Oh, what happened? What happened? What the fuck do you think happened? You're a tool, and you're not doing the job that you're designed to do. That's what happened. So it seems like it's not functioning correctly because it's not.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of what you're describing, this sort of modern day narcissism that you often see, especially, I mean, you see it on both sides of the political spectrum, but certainly on the far left, where it's use my pronouns or it's violence, right? This phenomenon is weird to me, and I was actually thinking about it this morning. It's weird because those same individuals who are extremely narcissistic in my eyes are the ones essentially pushing collectivism or some form of socialism, which is ironic because they are such narcissistic me type people. Yet on the other side of things, we talk about individual liberties and individualism versus collectivism and individual rights and responsibilities. Yet that's in the context of doing what's best for your family, your community, your country. So how do you sort of square those things? Because they seem at odds with one another, where the collectivists are so self-absorbed, yet on the other side of things, the individual liberty advocates are talking about doing what's best for the country.
This is, it's pretty easy to square, actually. It's called the is-ought debate, right? So there are some people who see the world as it is, and there are some people who see the world as it ought to be.
As it ought to be,
and
yeah.
If you... The way the world ought to be is that's where philosophy comes from, right? So It's like, life is fucking brutal. Everybody you know, including yourself, are going to die. You've got a short amount of time. There's disease. There's bad people. There's all kinds of fucked up shit going on here. It shouldn't be like that. It's not fair. Well, it fucking is, bro. It is like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
And if you reduce that down to what you're talking about, the difference between individual liberty and collectivism believes that things ought to be good all the time for everybody.
Right.
Which is that's a goofy belief. I mean, it's fucking stupid. Let's be real.
It is stupid.
And the belief centered around individual liberty is how the world really is, which is to say two things. One, the way things ought to be is only secured by effort. And two, this is, well, let me stay on one for a second. So what does it mean for all of this to be secured by effort? It's the difference between the citizen and the subject. It's the difference between building a house from the top down or the bottom up. I urge you to try building a house from the top down. Good fucking luck with that. That's not how physics works, right?
Right.
Everything, all the small things you do. It's why stuff like broken window theory works, because all of these little investments into the public buy-in to institutions, whether it's a local economy or some kind of global effort, those are the building blocks that make it stable, that make it work properly. So that's one. And two is about the motivation of people. We have plenty of data on communism now. We know for a fact that any kind of utopian ought-based ideology like that, or political ideology, only works with an authoritarian background. There's no way to force people into this without violence. And the violence builds a power structure that ultimately corrupts the idea at any rate, right? So what's the fucking point? It's the self-licking ice cream cone. It's pointless. Right. So that is the debate that people are having between collectivism and what you might call, the rights of man or something like that, right? So
right, or libertarianism, essentially. Yeah. It's interesting, man. I know you studied, I think, comparative religion, even though you're not religious. but you're certainly a philosophical thinker. And so I wanted to kind of get your take on that, because those are the kind of the thought experiments that I go through. And I'm a science guy. That's my background. I studied biochem, evolutionary biology, and then I did a PhD program in comparative physiology. And somehow I end up in this world talking politics with people, basically because I got tired of people ignoring objective biological reality, right? And so it was evident to me from listening to a lot of your stuff that you are a deep thinker. And so I was just curious about that. What, in terms of your background, just for people listening who might, I don't know, want to pursue whatever path this is, talking about these issues, were you always a political minded person, or did you find yourself just sort of talking about it by way of what was necessary for what you saw as what's best for the world? Were you into politics?
I guess in a way. I mean, I still don't think I'm into politics necessarily.
Yeah, I see what you mean by that. Yeah,
but
I try not to be too.
Yeah, but culture, yeah, sure. I mean, Plato says if you do not take an interest in the affairs of your government, then you're doomed to live under the rule of fools, right?
Right. And Breitbart said, what, politics is downstream of culture. So
yeah,
culture is important.
It's, I think I talk about culture because I think it's really important to understand how all of it, like if you start with the culture part, you can understand how you're being manipulated.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who said it first, but sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? It's hard to lie to people when they can see the truth in front of their faces, which is why stuff like manufacturing consent has become such a problem these days. And it ebbs and flows like in any other period in history. I mean, throughout the first 1,500 years of the church, they intentionally kept the Bible only in Latin, or I guess part of the New Testament, the Septuagint, was in Greek, but the Bible was intentionally kept in Latin so poor farmers couldn't read it. So if they wanted to connect with God, they had to come to the church or to the government, right?
Yeah.
And in the same way, science literacy in the Middle Ages was non-existent. Anybody that bucked the church's authority on science literacy was literally either exiled or fucking murdered for it. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's like a jealous boyfriend. You know what I mean? The reason they're jealous is because they are insecure about what they're providing their partner. And when they see their partner looking at or talking to somebody else, they're like, that person might have something I don't, or be doing something I'm not. And instead of being a fucking man about it and addressing that issue, they rage out about the downstream effect of it, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that's the state today. That's
correct. That's the state forever. Like forever, governments will there's never been a government that hasn't done that, and there never will be. Well, so in America, that's why we chose a federalist system of government where, instead of a top-down power structure, it's a bottom-up power structure. There are a couple of things we agreed on, as a group that the federal government will handle, and everything else goes back to the states, and then, from the states back to the local municipalities. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Right. But that's not people who decry our system of government fail to understand that it's simply not being executed in the proper way. Now, this is the same argument that a lot of people make about communism. Oh, it's never been tried correctly or whatever the fuck. Like, no, because you can't do it without authoritarianism.
Yeah, it's impossible.
We've absolutely successfully lived for many, many years under federalism. It's just that
well, it's the same with free markets too, or capitalism, right? Like people, it's adulterated, right, by government intervention most of the time. So you don't get to see it in its purest form.
Yeah, sure. I would say that the issue here is not the government, though; it's the people.
Right.
And this is why I
It's
do
human
the show
nature.
that I do, because everybody's fucking bitching about the government all the time and how fucked up the government is. Every government forever has been fucked up.
Well, we are the government as well. It in a reductive
Well,
sense,
we're
right?
not though. Not in America. We're supposed to be, but we're not because people won't take on the
Okay. Yeah, we're
responsibility.
supposed
They
to
would
be.
rather
Yeah.
read a fucking headline and then vote all R's or all D's and then go home and feel good about themselves or bad about the other side. That's
Well,
mental laziness, is what that is.
and that's what I was going to ask about when you were talking about the role of the church in essentially keeping people from God by way of the language that the scripture was written in. It's like that makes the assumption that if it were in a language they could understand, they would actually read it. These days, people,
Well, back then it was the
it's
only
out
book,
there,
so they probably
right,
would have
right,
read it. But yeah,
yeah,
these days not so much.
but like, right. So these days, it's there, and that's what I find myself like banging my head against the wall constantly about is that the average citizen, I don't know if I guess that's the proper term. I know you have a certain sense of a citizen, so maybe the average American, they don't care to even know about this stuff or to seek out knowledge. So how do we shift that? That's the big problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, start by talking about it with people outside of your fucking kin selected group. That
True.
helps.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it is probably the case that people have to start feeling some kind of pain before they'll start performing. Honestly, I mean, it's almost like a drug addict at this point. You have to let them hit rock bottom.
Right. And
Um,
we're seeing a little bit of that, I think, with the people who are unable to now ignore the fact that Biden is a walking fucking corpse and that
mm,
the Dems are propping up this Fetterman guy who can't even put together a sentence. It's like it's like, do you see what I'm seeing? And it's like, yeah, dude, I
mm.
see what you're seeing. I've been talking about it. Do you think more people are waking up because of stuff like that?
Yeah, I guess to some degree, although, it still seems like a lot of people are obfuscating the clear mental deficiencies of both Biden and Fetterman. But I would apply that same logic to all of the people in Congress and Senate who voted to authorize war in Iraq,
Right.
um, and who are now sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, right, to fight a proxy war with Russia. It's the same people doing the same shit. And there are still 45% of the country that call themselves Republican and are proud to say that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I forget where I saw it, but recently I saw a stat that said something like 60% of the voting age American populace wishes there was an alternative to the two parties. So it's like, why can't like the numbers are there? They're essentially outnumbered. Why can't we have any success with something like an independent or a libertarian? Is it just because of the infrastructure of the process?
I'm sure that's part of it, yeah, but there's also a lack of leadership. I mean, most
Yeah.
of the libertarian folks, well, for one, I'm not a libertarian. I think libertarian economics doesn't really make a lot of sense, but
Okay.
uh, that's another show. Um, but I think it's hard to make new friends as an adult. I think that's a good way to put it. And people have come to define themselves. A lot of their identity, especially the last 6 years or so, is become about whatever political party they're in. And it's a lot easier to fucking take your ball and go home than it is to go over to
Mm,
the new park and introduce yourself to a new group of kids and start playing kickball with them, right?
yeah.
Um, so, having a public gathering place like Twitter might it might help. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Elon Musk. I think the stuff he does with China is fucked up. He's
Yeah, it
also
is.
been quite cozy with Russia over the years. But if he simply levels the playing field on Twitter, that might have some benefit. But there aren't a whole lot of good apologists for third parties, and there's a lot of institutional capital in the two major parties. They're not in our Constitution, by the way. There's nothing in the
Right.
Constitution about Democrats or Republicans. Um, but you know, it's almost like invading North Korea. Nobody ever does it, although we all should. Somebody should have invaded and wiped out North Korea by now, but nobody wants to because nobody wants to get left there governing that place. Nobody wants to have to do what we did in Japan and what we did in Europe after World War II, because it's fucked. You know what I mean? And it costs a lot of money, and it might not go well. So I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who, could collectively tear at the underbelly, at least of the two major political parties. But here's what happens. And we saw it in the Fetterman case, actually. There was a guy running as an independent, and as soon as that debate was over and it looked like Oz was going to probably close the gap or overtake him, this independent guy who had 3% of the vote dropped out of the race because he wanted those votes to go back to Fetterman. That's how it works.
Got it.
So people, we're very myopic. We've come to believe, because of the way our elections work, that every 2 to 4 years, everything changes, and and maybe that's true because of the way it works, but it isn't true.
Right. Well, it does, but it doesn't, because of the permanent administrative state, right? Like the quote deep state that you always hear about.
Sure, but what I mean is more like the ball keeps rolling down the hill, no matter who's running alongside it, and so there's certain things that happen and are going to continue happening regardless of who's in power. But for some reason in America, we've got this idea that this election right now is the most important election ever. At least that's how we've been feeling lately, and I think it's because of the media, just alarmist bullshit from both sides. Terrorism and foreign threats on one side, and hurt feelings and the environment on the other side, or whatever the fuck.
And women's rights, that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's like, these things are important, but nothing is more important than the idea that America is built upon, which is that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the most effective inoculations against tyrannical bullshit. Like, that's the most important thing. And if we can't achieve that, then we don't deserve to have a fucking country, right? That's how I feel. There's no individual life in this country. Not you, not your children, not your fucking parents, nobody that you know is more important than the idea of America, the foundation that lets us all fucking stand here. And people are weak.
I agree, man. I agree. What do you think is, man, we got pretty deep pretty quick. Obviously there are bad actors, and then I think there are useful idiots. I think most people are useful idiots in our government, honestly. At least that's my take. When you sort of just try to objectively gauge like their level of intelligence, there's like no way this person's masterminding anything, right? So, and oftentimes we throw around the term they want this, they want that. What do you think, if you took like a 40,000 foot view of the state of things here, maybe even globally, because you have to include Klaus Schwab and all those evil fuckers, like what is actually happening right now? Why have things gotten as bad as they have? If you had to give a synopsis, right? Like a few sentences, here's the state of things.
Well, first, it is the case, and it is undeniable that no system of government scales indefinitely, or no system of community even scales indefinitely.
Right.
Ultimately, there will be a diminishing return on whatever thing it is you set up, whether it's a machine that can, like, at some point, there's a machine that we could build out of the materials we have that will be too big to function properly, regardless of how well it's engineered. It's just how physics works, right? And it's the same thing with government. Excuse me. As far as what's actually going on, I mean, who knows, right? There is part of me that believes there's some kind of mysterious cabal of people making decisions globally. But having worked in business and politics and the military and the intelligence community, you can plainly see how things happen. It doesn't have to be. There doesn't have to be like 15 world leaders in a room saying, "Hey, we're gonna fucking do this or do that. We're going to force vaccinate a bunch of people. No, you can just, like, all these people think the same. It's hive mind. They want to control their populations. They want to exploit their power and gain more power and wealth for themselves. And when in the era of digital communication, the good old boy backhand deal, wink and a nod, where you don't say what you're actually going to do, but everybody in the room knows what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can do that on a global scale. And that is how I think all of this works. I think there's manipulators out there, like Epstein was one of them. Klaus Schwab, certainly one of them. There's a bunch, right? Bill Gates is one of them now, that are trying to push things in a certain direction, and people just kind of go along with it because of institutional power or ignorance or fear or whatever the case is. But these people do multivariate testing for a living, right? They bounce ideas. It's called a test balloon in the political landscape. So you leak or float an idea and see how the public reacts using social media, and then you decide how you're going to fucking message from there. You couldn't do this in the past. Like, they did it to a smaller degree. When the Romans were going to nominate somebody for tribune, for example, they would float the idea through the town criers first to see if people got pissed off about it. And if they didn't, they would do it, right? And if they did get pissed off, they would do a couple of different things. They would hire some of the acting troops to do plays that cast that person in a positive light, or cast their competitor in a negative light, or whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to get around it. Now, though, you don't even have to do any of that shit. You can just have a click farm in fucking Indonesia, running constant Twitter comments 24 hours a day, trying to shape the narrative. And that's the danger we found ourselves in now.
Or if you're PayPal, you can just build in some legalese and see what the response is, and then be like, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah, but it's like, Ben Franklin famously said that people that sacrifice their liberties for temporary security deserve neither.
Yeah.
I would say we're beyond that. I think we're sacrificing our liberty now for convenience, not even for security, because what more security do we have?
Yeah, very good point. I mean, we have it so good, and people say this all the time, but I do think it's true. It's like we don't have any real problems, like problems of life or death, problems of survival. So we create problems, right? And for us, we've jaded ourselves so much to believe that if we don't have this certain level of comfort, which is, I think, the ultimate killer of excellence, if we don't have that certain level of comfort, we conflate that with safety, right? And so we, exactly what you just said, it's like we're willing to just give it all up for comfort, basically, in America anyway.
Right. Yeah, it's there's a scene in Generation Kill where Alexander Skarsgård's character is hanging out with the Rolling Stone reporter. Well, they're kind of in a gunfight, so there's rounds being fired everywhere, and they're hiding behind a tire. And Skarsgård's character says, Iceman Brad, he's a real human being. He says that that the idea of safety is pretty interesting, right? It's relative. So back home, you feel pretty safe most of the time because there's not a war going on. Right now, there's a war going on. We're in the middle of a fucking war, but behind this tire right now, I feel pretty safe.
You feel safe, I mean? Yeah.
So it's like,
it's relative.
We do that. Like, the human brain, we're at the level of consciousness where we're still extremely affected by all of the genetic shit that's going on, all the genetic memory that we have, what we would call our instinct, all the physiological traits that have developed over the years to warn us about. I mean, the human brain is essentially a very sophisticated machine that delineates between threats and benefits, right? That's right. What it's built to do. But we're still very, very tuned in at the physiological level on the threats and benefits, and we haven't quite figured it out in the upper mammalian brain yet, how to contextualize that shit in our environment. So what we do is our memory is actually memories of our own memory. It's not memories of the actual event. We construct these things in our brain, the theater of the mind, to make sense to us, because if you can look down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, warmth, safety, security, all that stuff. And then, as it goes up, we're in the middle part of now where we're trying to contextualize the creature comforts that we want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why should I have to suffer if I don't really, really need to? You know what I mean? But that's the point. You do really need to. That's the way we've developed as a species. It's not that we're defined by our struggle. We're defined by overcoming struggle.
Exactly.
That's how you get smarter. It's how you get fucking more mentally healthy. It's how you get more physically healthy, by overcoming struggle. You put struggle in your own way intentionally.
It's like as we moved up the hierarchy of needs, we started to slide privileges into the category of rights. And now
Sure.
we've gotten so comfortable that things that before were, I mean, healthcare is a great example. It's, there's a huge debate over this, right? Like a lot of people say it's a right, but a lot of people also say it's a privilege. And it's like, I think that our level of comfort has caused that, right? Like in some small way, because we're so used to just having so much, at least in America, right? We don't, to your point, the biochemistry that is associated with, like, I don't know, being chased by a fucking predator on the plains, and the biochemistry of somebody cutting you off in traffic. It's probably not that disparate, right? Like, it's the same shit happening in your brain, and that's why you react the way you do when somebody cuts you off, and why you have scenarios where dudes get out of their car and walk up to the other car ready to fucking fight somebody. Right. It's like we haven't, like you said, contextualized these modern day creature comforts with, okay, I have a brain that evolved over hundreds of thousands, millions of years in this context, and now it's thrust into this context. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I was just kind of thinking out loud, trying to make sense of what you said, but I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, so I like the healthcare one, because that's one that I think that the conservatives are extremely wrong about.
That healthcare is not a right.
Well, I sure, but let me contextualize. So,
okay,
as you know, just from the basis of the show, Citizen, rights aren't some ephemeral thing that exist and are
right.
And like, there's nobody out there applying this shit. That's not how that works. And you don't get them from the government. They're natural rights.
They're natural. Yeah.
So it's the thing about liberty and human rights. They only exist if they exist for everybody all the time. Otherwise, it's just a more selective version of feudalism, right?
Right.
So you should work as hard to secure the rights of others as you should your own, if not harder, frankly, because that's the contribution you as a human being are required to make to society if you want to enjoy these comforts that we've developed. So on healthcare specifically, we're the richest country in the history of the world. And this is not a rhetorical question. I'm asking you sincerely. Do you think it's ethical to tell people they can be as healthy as they can afford to be in the richest country in the history of the world?
My immediate reaction to that is no. I don't think that's ethical.
Right.
But I haven't thought deeply about it.
Well, let's think deeply about it. So you as a citizen,
right.
I guess the follow-on question is, what are you personally willing to surrender to make sure people are taken care of? The problem is the way in which I think most people agree with that statement. Actually, it's very difficult to hate up close, and it's very difficult to watch people suffer up close. It's extremely hard to do those things.
Yeah.
And I would say, regardless of political affiliation, 99% of people agree with that statement, and they would feel the same emotions and physiological and psychological triggers if they were exposed to suffering and pain and death and stuff like that. So you as a citizen, what is it exactly that you're willing to surrender to make sure people are taken care of, to satisfy that basic human need, both for them as somebody who needs the safety, security, and healthcare, and yourself who needs to feel like you're contributing to society?
So I would
problems
say
that we've made. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you answer it first.
yeah. So I mean, for me, just responding right now, I would say anything that doesn't cross the threshold of causing harm to myself or my immediate family, but certainly if it impedes on what I consider to be extra or a privilege or something that I've garnered outside of my lower level needs, absolutely I'm willing to sacrifice it.
So here's the problem that we've made a huge mistake in how we've solved this issue. We
Okay.
have this idea that we can form large bureaucratic bodies to solve this problem for us while we go about our daily lives. And it's the same mistake we've made with Amazon, with media 50 different times, whether it was original television program to cable to whatever the fuck and now streaming. It's all like we solve these problems in a way that mitigates our personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the right answer. The problem needs to be solved in a way that fixes the fucking problem. And if you think that a part of that, look, it does mitigate our singular personal responsibility to some degree. Many hands make light work. That is a true statement. But
many hands also cause diffusion of responsibility.
Sure,
Too.
yeah.
So that's
yeah.
the problem we run into.
Well,
There, right?
it's not just the diffusion of responsibility. It's the power vacuum that proceeds the diffusion of responsibility. And our solution as Western governments, pretty much everywhere in the world, has been to let the government handle it. Now, when the fuck has that ever worked out?
Never.
When is relying on bureaucrats, people elected through popularity contests who have conflicts of interest in the business community? When has that ever worked? It is literally never worked. As a matter of fact, there's a good example recently of it. Kamala Harris said this week that we're going to order a bunch of these electric school buses. One, they're not efficient. They cost 4 times more money. They catch on fire pretty routinely, which is not great for kids, I'm told. I'm not a doctor, but I'm told that fire and kids are not good together. But the other part of this is that the people on the board of this company that make these buses include a former transportation secretary, major donor to the Democratic Party, people that are actually on political staffs right now, people that are politicians right now. That's a big problem. You know what I mean? And that's what you should expect to happen. Dan Crenshaw said it best. Why would I run for Congress and serve my community if I can't get rich doing it? You know what I mean?
Dude, the biggest fucking disappointment, that guy. Like,
I mean, sure. I was never disappointed by him because I knew he was a cunt from the first time I saw him.
Yeah, you're smarter than me. I actually had a little bit of hope, dude. But anyway.
I'm just cynical, maybe. I don't know, but it seems to work out every time, which is...
So along those lines, I wanted to ask you this because I know that the All Politicians APAC thing is yours, you created. Is there a politician today that is not a cunt? Like, genuinely? So what are your thoughts on well, that's not a good example, actually. Tulsi Gabbard. I don't like her Second Amendment stance. Because I've actually taken that seriously. You say that, and I've tried to think of some that I'm like, no, actually, they're really maybe Rand Paul to some extent, Ron Paul when he was, but then it's like I have issues with them too. But I don't know if that necessarily makes them a cunt. It's just we have disagreements on things. So, is there anyone you think has integrity?
Maybe, in the moment. That's the problem. We deal in monoliths these days. We deal in absolutes, and life is not absolute. I'm sure I've been a cunt plenty of times too.
Sure. So politicians can be cunts, but sometimes they're not.
Well, I haven't seen any not behaving that way, frankly.
Right. The monolith is okay in this scenario. They're all cunts.
Well, it's like, if you've ever worked in network security, there's 2 types of lists on a black box. There's an allow list and a deny list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a deny list means that I allow most traffic except for the ones that I specifically deny. And an allow list means I block all traffic except for the ones I specifically allow. I'm on the latter half of that when it comes to politicians. Like the burden of proof after hundreds of years of you fucking me over, right? Fucking over our communities and the escalation and fucking us over both financially and through our security and our privacy over the last several decades. The burden of proof is now on you to show me that you're a person that's getting involved in things for the right reason, not the burden of proof on me to accept you as a swell guy, because that's not how it works, bud.
Guilty until proven innocent.
That's right.
Politicians, yeah.
And to me, that's the quintessential American spirit towards politicians. You should be immediately skeptical of anybody that's telling you they can come solve your problems if you just give them a little bit of power. You know what I mean? That's the devil talking to you. And again, I'm not religious, but that's the story of the Garden of Eden. Like, God doesn't know what he's talking about. This stuff will let you know just as much as he does. That's why he doesn't want you to have it. Trust me. Like, nah, man.
Right. Well, it goes against the deepest core of what it means to be a biological entity in the world. And what I mean by that is altruism is so incredibly rare in the animal kingdom, period. And that means doing something that harms you to help someone else, which is why it's insane to me, getting back to your point, that we trust any politicians when they say shit that ultimately amounts to altruism, or that they do have our best interest in mind. Because, and that's what I love so much about America, is that our default is sort of skeptical of what these people say to us, or at least it should be. And, it just makes sense to me. But then I see the net result of the American populace and the way we vote and the motherfuckers in charge. And it confuses me, because if I were to talk to any given individual, chances are they would probably agree with all these things we're saying, yet all these individuals writ large equals this clusterfuck.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a species of monkey actually that is supposed to be, what is it? Macaque, something, I don't fucking remember what it is.
Macaque, maybe?
Yeah, macaque. That's it. Yeah. So there's a psychological study done on macaques. I don't remember what it was, but they put them in a room and taught them that if they press a button, they'll get food. But they show them that if they press that button, another monkey gets shocked. Now, only about, I think, 10% of the monkeys would press the button. They would starve to death before they would shock their buddy, or it was other monkeys that they didn't even know, right? Yeah. And then
that's interesting.
Yeah, and then the monkeys who had been previously shocked were even less likely to do it to somebody else. And that's probably where we should have stopped evolving, right there.
Yeah, I agree.
We haven't done ourselves any favors by trying to figure all this shit out now. But yeah, it's you should never. Under what circumstances would you assume that somebody else has your best interest in mind without first demonstrating that value to you, right? So when I see people like politicians who have recently switched to the other political party and everybody jumps on their dick about it, I'm like, no, that doesn't. This is magician's patter. That's the bait and switch. Do you not see what's happening? Like Candace Owens, for example, went from like a hardcore progressive to a hardcore fucking conservative. Really? You went from one side of the spectrum to the other? That's not suspicious at all, is it? No, It's a fucking grift. All these people are grifters, man.
You think Candace is a grifter?
Yeah, you're goddamn right I do, man. What the fuck? She's just trying to build a business over there, trying to sell fucking parlor from her husband to Kanye. That's all this is. All this bullshit is about money.
Let me ask you this. I don't disagree with you, but when it comes to grifters, which I think there's, and I post a lot of shit about this. These people make me fucking sick. But do you think that if you had to choose between a world where there are grifters like Candace Owens who ultimately there's a fruit fly in my studio. It's driving me nuts. There's
a good study on fruit flies and evolution as well, by the way.
Drosophila melanogaster.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One of my favorites.
Yeah, absolutely. Sucks that they don't live very long. Anyway, enjoy your life.
Well, no,
buddy.
it's good. It's good that they don't live long because we were able to study like 2 million generations or
Well,
something.
well, yeah, they're good as a model species.
Yeah.
So is C. elegans. That's
Yep.
been
Yep.
the worm. But with Candace, it's like, yeah, it sucks. I hate the actual morality of it all. But is it a net positive because she can ultimately get some people to think? Like this documentary she just released about BLM.
hmm
I think there is some positivity in that. I don't like the fact that she might be a quote grifter, but if she wakes a certain number of people up and makes some money in the process, is that a bad thing?
Well, I mean, the debate you're having internally right now is like, can you separate the art from the artist, right?
Right.
To some degree, yeah, you can, right? If it's somebody who's like Christian Bale, who's just kind of an aggressive dick, then
Yeah.
yeah, you can. If it's
He
like,
makes good movies though, dude.
yeah, the movies are great. But if it's like a child rapist or something like that,
No,
I don't give
die,
a fuck
fucking
what.
die. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it is. So certainly there's degrees, and life is
But
not
the
all black and white.
the political grifters specifically. If
Um,
their grift didn't exist, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's hard to say on a singular issue like that because what would
Hmm.
replace that grift? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I'm sure you've heard the old anecdote uh, about the Bedouin. Um, he's a dad, and his kid is born, and he's like, "Oh, congratulations!" And he goes, "Maybe." And then the kid breaks his leg, and he goes, "Oh, that's so bad for you." And he goes, "Oh, maybe." But
Right.
then the country goes to war, and the kid doesn't have to go to war, and he's like, "Oh, that's so good for you." And he goes, "Maybe," and it just goes on and on like that. You never know if
Hmm.
things are going to be good or bad in a fucking vacuum like that. So I'm not
True.
sure what would replace the grift because it does, as you said, expose a lot of things that are going on.
But we make these statements though that are sort of antithetical to that, like "fuck these grifters," right? Like maybe not "fuck these grifters."
Oh
Like
no,
maybe,
no, fuck them for sure,
but
100%.
but okay, but that's not based on whether or not they're a net positive or negative, just the pure morality of it.
No, I think they're a net negative,
Okay,
certainly.
okay,
Yeah, 100%. I think it's because it especially today, like it's more of a net negative today than it would have been 50 years ago because it's an aspirational
mm,
marketing situation. So
mm,
yeah, they
that's
expose a
true.
lot of information that you wouldn't otherwise have, but now there's 300 million motherfuckers on the internet trying to be just like Candace Owens, and they're grifting just like she is. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
when people's word stops meaning anything, all we have left are better and better lies. You know what I
mm,
mean?
yep,
That's Jon Snow. He said that, so it's a smart thing to say because writers from Harvard said it on HBO. But it's a true statement. The more we obfuscate reality to make concessions for these things instead of being rooted firmly in the principles that govern our lives, especially here in America, all we have are better and better grifters. And at some point, there is no truth anymore. You know what I mean? And that's why over the past couple of decades, it's been so much easier for the left to program people with their stupid bullshit because the right decided at some point to play their game too. After
mm,
Foucault became popular in the 1950s and 60s here in America
yep,
and infiltrated the universities with this fucking collectivist, there is no real truth bullshit. Republicans in the early 90s, especially with Newt Gingrich and the family first bullshit, decided to play, well, if they're going to play that game, we're going to play it too. And here we are today, right? It took them, from that point when he became speaker, it took them 7 years, 8 years to invade Iraq, right? After Clinton had dropped bombs on them and got lit up for it. Like all the Republicans, if you remember the fucking 2000 electoral campaign for George W. Bush, was that we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to bomb Iraq anymore. We're not going to fucking do nation building as a country anymore. And it took him fucking less than 2 years to be involved in nation building. It's the same bullshit. So no, it's not a net positive. You can
yeah,
find positives in it, but that doesn't make it a net positive.
yeah. I agree. I just like asking those types of questions because it's stuff that I think about a lot. It's like, you've got that friend who's a shithead, and they're a shithead. You acknowledge they're a shithead, but they're still your friend. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, I see some good in them, but They fucking, they're a compulsive liar and they have all these flaws. So I always wonder about that. And sometimes I wonder if I'm being an idealist and maybe I should be more realistic, right? Do you consider yourself to be an idealist? Because it sounds like, I mean, in some ways you might be, especially with the principles that Citizen lays forth. I think those are fairly idealistic, although those are things that I strive for. I went through the list and I align with a lot of that. At least I try to. I fail all the time, right? But would you consider yourself an idealist? And then on top of that, do you think you're an optimist or a pessimist?
That's a good question. I don't know if I would say optimist or pessimist.
You fall in the gray space?
Yeah, probably. I mean, first things first. Carl Sagan used to say that for me, it's far better to grasp the universe as it actually is, rather than persistent delusion, regardless of how gratifying that delusion might be.
Yeah.
I think that calling people idealists is a very reductive and lazy way to be cynical about what they're trying to say. For example,
I agree.
The principle, one of the principles is to, it says, I'll do something every day to help my country. My countrymen are all men. And people very routinely ask me, well, how can I do something every day? Like, you can hold the door for somebody every fucking day.
Exactly.
Or you can say something nice to somebody every day. You can see a piece of garbage on the street and pick it up every single day. And being in that mindset, again, it's about bottom up, right? Being in that mindset puts you in a bolo, be on the lookout for opportunities to help other people. And as your brain is, as a human being with upper mammalian brain and community-based rationality, you're going to start looking for bigger and bigger things to do to help people. And then an opportunity will come and you'll be able to do something bigger than you were before. That's not idealism. That's the basic fucking reality of how human civilization works. And it's the foundation, actually, of human civilization. None of this would exist if it weren't for that. So I reject that idea that any of this is idealism. I think it's very doable. I think it's actually practical to behave this way. A lot more practical than the way that we fucking behave with blinders on and pretending like our fucking fears and suspicions are somehow reality.
No, I agree with you. I was just curious because sometimes I think in a way, and it's an epistemological issue, right? It depends on your definition of idealism, right? Because for me, in some ways, I like to live my life as an idealist in terms of I picture what I'm striving to be, right? And I think that's a good thing. But I think that once that becomes unrealistic, to go back to what you were saying, then it's detrimental. So, and I think that's where kind of this socialist ideology takes you, right? Because that is against human nature.
Well, think about it this way. Is a baseball player an idealist for wanting to get a hit every time they come up to the plate?
No.
Of course not, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, but the best that exist only succeed 3 in 10 times. They fail 7 out of 10 times. So 70% of the time they fail, which is probably more than we as human beings fail at the stuff we're trying to do. Not that that's necessarily a perfect analog, but it is an analog for the is-ought fallacy, right? It's the like, you should try your best to do your best all the time. You shouldn't expect to always succeed, but you should always put forth a good faith effort to succeed. If you expect to always succeed, then you will become cynical and jaded, and you will start to blame other people. Society did this to me, or my parents did this to me, or whatever the fuck else. And if you divorce yourself from the system entirely, then you become nihilistic. And that leads to, like, nihilism is the source of quite a bit of the modern problems that we see today. Depression and suicide and gun violence and gang violence and all this shit. It's just nihilism. They don't believe in the infrastructure of the system, so they've tuned out of it and they're going to do whatever they want to do now, right?
Yeah.
That's how it works. That's why I say the principles that I have, they are not idealistic. They are very practical. And I don't think it is idealistic to expect the best out of yourself. I think it would be stupid to expect yourself to always succeed, but it would be unethical to not always try to succeed.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I think where idealism comes in is, so it's, you can expect the best out of yourself, but I think idealism comes in when you start to define what the best is, right? And if you set that metric just way too far out of what's realistic. But I agree with you. The principles that you lay forth in Citizen are very realistic and therefore not idealistic. But I like to just kind of challenge things like that, because today
you have to decide whether or not it's a platitude or not. So it's like
exactly.
It's like a science. You know this as a somebody that studied biology, as a scientist. Ideas are fun. They're great. They're really interesting. Thought experiments are great, but unless you can construct a physical experiment to test what you're talking about, it's nothing, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of how I developed a list. Are there practical ways to exercise these things, or am I just saying shit like fucking motivational speakers on television? You know what I mean? I don't have time for that.
Right. And I think that some people who are more cynical might just immediately default to that, whereas you have put that level of thought into it, and it's kind of refreshing, because, and this is why I was attracted. I've been with Phorm for like 5 years, but originally why I was attracted to Andy is just how realistic he is, right? Like, it was rare to find a supplement brand that said put in the work, because everything was fucking 7-minute abs or what the fuck ever, right? And so that to me is refreshing. I know we're already kind of over an hour here, but I'm just curious, from your perspective, what is an example of maybe one or a few people who you do think are in the thought leader, if you could call it that, space, who aren't just full of shit? Like, who are people that you think are on the right track and giving humanity a positive message that's useful?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, Andy's definitely one of them, although he's an entrepreneur. He's not necessarily what you would consider to be a stereotypical or prototypical thought leader, although he is, right? Because even when he's wrong about something, there's a period of self-reflection about it. And I think that's really important. Another guy I would mention is Peter Boghossian.
I love his stuff. Yeah.
He was, if your audience isn't aware, he was a philosophy professor at, I think, at Oregon State University or Portland State University. Yeah. Obviously, he had to leave there because that place is crazy. And I think he's in the process of moving here to Austin now. But
everybody is, man. It seems like everybody is.
He's done a lot of thought experiments in previous books, and now he's doing practical experiments with groups of disparate people to. Hopefully the book will be done as soon as possible, because I really want to read it. But he's putting all of his research into a book right now. Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom is a buddy of mine. He's really doing it right as well. Has a lot of interesting people. I mean, he's got a bit more of an entertainment flair to it, because it's not just about politics and culture and shit, but he's all over the place, in business, in fitness, in companies, all sorts of stuff, and then sometimes just in interesting ideas in general. But he hits on a lot of stuff, and it's kind of rooted in the idea of modern wisdom is that something he and I have talked about quite a bit in the past, which is we seem, as though in Western culture, we seem to unsolve problems all the time that we've solved historically. Like, think about where we are in American politics right now, where it seems like the people that have it most figured out when it comes to culture and how to live your daily life are extremely rooted in like Stoic philosophy that is 2,000 to 3,000 years old. None of these ideas are new. They're ideas that were developed when all of this bright light bullshit wasn't around. You know what I mean? So all of his stuff is kind of rooted in that ideology. So I really like him too.
Yeah, I love his stuff. He's the, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one who is like a club promoter and stuff. And then, he has a great interview style. I like his stuff a lot. Um, all right, man. Well, I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff for hours, but I'm going to be coming on your show here soon. I'm looking forward to it. Chances are if they follow me, they probably already follow you, but just in case, where can people find your stuff if they want to look at more of your material?
At Dan Hollaway, it's DANHOLLAWAY on social media platforms and Citizen podcast. And if you want to listen to some military style humor where we say fucked up shit, then check out Drinkin Bros, because that's a different conversation over there. Because that conversation is going to include, I would say, if you're listening around children or in public or at work, wear headphones. That would be my warning about that one.
Yeah, I've definitely had Drinkin Bros playing around my 5-year-old and had to like hit the volume button real quick.
One of our buddies' kids came in the other day, and as soon as she walked through the door, she says, "Welcome to Drinkin Bros, kids." I'm like, oh no, that kid is too young to know that phrase, but whatever.
Dude, I have to ask you, because I'm from the Carolinas. You grew up in South Carolina, right? Or that's where you're from?
Yeah, I grew up until I was 18 or so in Greenville, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the Lake Wiley area now, just south of Charlotte, North Carolina, right under the state line, because fuck North Carolina anymore. But I grew up in North Carolina, and people always ask me why I don't have an accent. And I was just curious, because you don't either. Have you thought about that? Is there anything you attribute that to?
Yeah, I just didn't want to sound like a fucking hillbilly, I guess.
Okay, fair.
But, a big part of it was actually watching. I was an extreme introvert as a child. And a lot of my interaction came through watching like science documentaries or listening to books on tape, they were actual books on tape back then. It was actual cassette tapes. Like I had a library card from like the age of 4, and around that time is when I started getting books on tape on different things like philosophy and science and things like that. So maybe it was that. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it too much. I don't think it was something I did intentionally. I just heard a lot of different accents, and it became important to me to pronounce words the correct way, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it was something I never really thought about until I I did grad school at UC Berkeley. The fucking, it was an experience.
Yeah, I used to live in Oakland.
Yeah, so you know. And people would all ask me, because they expected me to sound like the fucking Beverly Hillbillies because I was from the Carolinas. And I started to think about it, and I think it's kind of the same thing. I had terrible parents. They were pieces of shit. I didn't want to be like them. They had Southern accents, but then also I was a very introverted kid, read a lot of books, watched a lot of stuff, and I think I picked it up from there. Plus, grew up on the Outer Banks where there's a lot of tourists, and so I was exposed to a lot of different people. But anyway, anytime I meet somebody from the South who doesn't have a Southern accent, I always ask them, because it's just something I'm personally interested in. But all right, man. Well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, brother. And I'm looking forward to coming on Citizen. Everybody listening, until next time, keep your minds free.